Imagine a female figure who traverses 2 millennia of history, shrouded in mystery, idolatry, and misunderstandings. Mary Magdalene, one of the most enigmatic figures of Christianity, challenges everything we thought we knew about the followers of Jesus. She has been portrayed in many ways: a repentant sinner, a saint, a lover, a close disciple, and even a bearer of unique spiritual knowledge. But who really was Mary Magdalene? Why does her story continue to intrigue us? Over the centuries, her role has been distorted, shrouded in shadows, but also preserved in less-known texts. What might these forgotten writings say about her? Could Mary Magdalene have been, in fact, the closest and most intimate disciple of Jesus? In traditional Christianity, we are often introduced to Mary Magdalene as a woman who had committed sins and found redemption alongside Jesus. However, this image of her as a sinner is the result of a narrative that emerged many years after her death. In fact, the oldest texts make no mention of any sin, let alone the idea that she would have been a repentant prostitute. This was a later construction, influenced by interpretations that sought to minimize her importance, perhaps due to the discomfort her strong presence caused in a male-dominated society. What could have motivated this change in perception over time? In the canonical Gospels, Mary Magdalene appears in a discreet but significant way. She is one of the few constant witnesses present at the most crucial moments of Jesus' life. She was by his side at the crucifixion, when many disciples fled, and she was the first to see Jesus after the resurrection. This is quite extraordinary, as in ancient texts, it was not common for a woman to be the main witness to something so impactful. This means that, in the eyes of the early Christians, Mary Magdalene had unquestionable importance. She was a faithful follower, one of the first to believe in the miracle of the resurrection. But does this role indicate a deeper spiritual connection? The very word disciple challenges the norms of that time. It was uncommon for women to hold the status of disciples, let alone to be seen as closest to a teacher. Yet, the mentions of Mary in various texts suggest that, in some way, she transcended these cultural boundaries. Perhaps Mary was not just a follower, but someone who understood the words and essence of Jesus in a unique way. This idea gains support when we consider that she was the first person Jesus appeared to after his resurrection, entrusting her with the message of new life. Why did he choose her, rather than one of his apostles? This choice suggests that Mary Magdalene was more than just a follower. Perhaps she was one of the people Jesus trusted the most. The details of these events lead us to ponder whether, in fact, there wasn't a special connection between them. Perhaps Mary possessed a deeper understanding of his message and was able to see beyond the words, touching the spiritual essence of what Jesus conveyed. In many texts, Mary is mentioned not only as a companion, but as someone with an advanced understanding of Jesus' teachings. But how was this spiritual closeness forgotten or distorted? If we look at the historical context, it is clear that over the centuries, powerful and vocal women have been systematically silenced or reinterpreted to fit into secondary roles. The interpretations of the Church, during the Middle Ages for example, began to solidify Mary Magdalene as the redeemed sinner and not as the wise one. Apparently, there was an interest in keeping her in a lower position, a woman who redeemed herself, rather than one who was respected and followed by other disciples. What does this say about the treatment of feminine wisdom within Christian spirituality? Historical records show that this image of Mary Magdalene as the redeemed sinner was promoted over the years, but not everyone accepted this interpretation. There were communities that believed in a different view of her, especially among the early Gnostic Christians, who considered Mary a central figure, a person with a high spiritual connection. She was seen as someone capable of accessing hidden truths, a role we rarely see assigned to a woman in traditional religious texts. Perhaps Mary Magdalene's spiritual strength was so powerful that her true role threatened the established hierarchy. Some scholars argue that the first Christians knew their true role, but over time, these stories were obscured. The impact of Mary Magdalene in the early days of Christianity was diminished, but the memory of her importance never completely disappeared. Her figure continued to inspire, although often shrouded in legends and interpretations. The fact that Mary was the first to witness the resurrection may be a clear indication that she not only understood Jesus' teachings, but was also someone of absolute trust. As we explore these possibilities, the question arises, could Mary Magdalene have received teachings that other disciples were unable to comprehend? The image of her as the bearer of hidden wisdom began to gain strength among scholars and spiritual seekers, suggesting that perhaps Jesus shared with her reserved knowledge, which was not recorded in the Gospels. Many believe that Mary Magdalene had a special, almost mystical role in Jesus' mission. These question marks about the true position of Mary Magdalene in Jesus' life and early Christianity invite us to explore sources beyond the traditional Gospels, such as the Gnostic texts, where her role is radically different. Instead of a sinner, we see a spiritual leader, someone who walked alongside Jesus as an equal. These texts suggest that Mary Magdalene was the bearer of profound teachings, which continue to inspire those who seek a truth beyond conventions even today. Are we ready to consider Mary Magdalene under this new light? In the canonical Gospels, we find a Mary Magdalene who emerges at key moments, but in a discreet and silent manner. This enigmatic, almost ethereal profile seems to contrast with the central role she could have played. Mentions of Mary in these texts are limited, but her impact on the crucial events of Jesus' life is undeniable. She appears as a persistent, strong, and devout figure whose love and faith transcend barriers. But do these texts tell everything? Or do they omit details that would change our understanding of her role alongside Jesus? Right in the Gospels, Mary Magdalene is introduced as one of the women who followed Jesus, mentioned among others who helped with their resources, Luke 8:2-3. This detail suggests that she not only participated in Jesus' life, but also contributed to his mission. The phrase, help with resources, may sound trivial, but in the context of the time, it reveals an exceptional situation. Few women had the freedom to support someone so publicly, which indicates that Mary had a strong social position, or perhaps financial independence. But what would have led this woman to join the group of disciples, challenging the social norms of her time? The story of Mary Magdalene is particularly interesting because, in the canonical Gospels, she becomes a witness to events that no one else experienced. She was present at the crucifixion, when many other disciples fled, fearing reprisals. At a time when darkness seemed to prevail, she remained, without hesitation. This act of loyalty already demonstrates a special and deep connection with Jesus' mission. She was not simply a distant follower, but someone willing to risk everything for him. Could this be an indication of a spiritual closeness that the other disciples perhaps did not understand? But it is in the resurrection that Mary Magdalene truly stands out. The canonical Gospels describe that she was the first to see the resurrected Jesus, a pivotal moment that forms the foundation of Christianity. It's fascinating that Jesus chose Mary for this moment, especially considering that, at that time, a woman's testimony was not valued in Jewish society. Yet, he appears to her and instructs her to bring the message to the other disciples. Mary Magdalene thus becomes the first messenger of the resurrection, an honor role that few fully understood. Could this event have been an indication of her importance and closeness to Jesus? This post-resurrection encounter has generated countless interpretations. The phrase "Noli me tangere," or "do not touch me," which Jesus is said to have spoken to Mary according to the Gospel of John, has led to various speculations about its meaning. Some see in this moment a gesture of spiritual elevation, an invitation for Mary to understand that her connection with Jesus should now be spiritual, not physical. Others suggest that this phrase was included to emphasize a transition from the earthly to the transcendent. But regardless of the interpretation, it is clear that there was an emotional and spiritual intimacy between the two that transcends the common relations of master and disciple. The way Mary is treated in the canonical Gospels also reveals a lot about the culture and constraints of her time. In a period where women had limited roles and rarely received positions of leadership, Jesus' choice to reveal himself first to her was a disruptive gesture. This gesture suggests that, in Jesus' eyes, Mary Magdalene was not just a follower, but a true confidant. Yet the Gospels mention her briefly, almost cautiously, suggesting that the authors of these texts may have limited the space she occupies. To what extent did these authors filter or reinterpret her role? Despite her brief appearances, the impact of Mary Magdalene in the Gospels is enduring. Even with the few words and descriptions, her presence resonates as a symbol of unshakable faith and absolute loyalty. In a time of great fear and uncertainty, she stood by Jesus until the very end, while many others had already left. This makes her an unusual character among the disciples, a woman with a steadfast heart, who seemed to fully understand the essence of Jesus' mission. Could this indicate that she received unique teachings that the other disciples did not understand? In the crucifixion and the tomb, Mary Magdalene is portrayed as someone who transcended the role of follower. She becomes a witness to pain and resurrection, participating in the deepest moments of Jesus' journey. But this view has been obscured over the centuries. Her figure has been diluted in simplistic representations, which minimized her importance. She began to be seen as an occasional witness, or worse, as a redeemed sinner, a label that never appeared in the earliest texts. The transformation of her image over time raises questions about how Christianity chose to deal with the presence of women in leadership roles. Over the centuries, the image of Mary Magdalene has been shaped and interpreted according to the needs of the Church, but we always return to these canonical passages that suggest something more. The fact that Jesus chose her to be the first to witness the miracle of resurrection is a clear acknowledgement of her position. The term, Apostle of the Apostles, which some scholars attribute to her, is an attempt to capture Mary's unique role as the messenger of new life. Would she have been considered an apostle by the early followers of Jesus? The contrast between the sparse details in the Gospels and the weight of their actions leads us to a provocative conclusion. The authors of the canonical texts may have chosen to omit aspects of their story that pointed to a role of spiritual leadership. We know that there were cultural pressures to conform the accounts to the context of the time, but these omissions raise another question. What would have been the true impact of Mary Magdalene on the early Christian movement? Could it be possible that she had a role similar to that of Peter or John, but her story was filtered by those who wrote the texts? The idea of spiritual leadership exercised by a woman is not just a matter of interpretation, but a subversion of conventional roles. Jesus' choice to appear to Mary first is a clear indication that he saw in her qualities that went beyond the conventional. Perhaps Mary Magdalene understood the spiritual dimension of Jesus' message with a depth that escaped other disciples. This fact raises the question, if her story had been fully told, how would it have shaped the Christianity we know today? As we explore these canonical Gospels, we realize that, although the presence of Mary Magdalene is subtle, it remains loaded with meaning. Her figure challenges conventional interpretations and leads us to question the choices made by those who wrote and preserved these texts. What is the true spiritual legacy of Mary Magdalene, and how does it continue to inspire and challenge our notions of wisdom, leadership, and faith? In the canonical texts, Mary Magdalene emerges as an essential but incomplete figure. It's as if part of her story remains hidden, suggested only in fragments and interpretations. However, There is another dimension to Mary that resurfaces in the apocryphal Gospels, especially in the Gnostic writings. These texts, discovered centuries later and rejected by the official church, offer a radically different view. Mary Magdalene is a central spiritual leader, an enlightened disciple, and possibly the most intimate knower of Jesus' profound teachings. These new perspectives not only reconstruct the image of Mary, but challenge centuries of traditional interpretation. What could these texts reveal to us about her? Among the apocryphal writings, one of the most notable is the Gospel of Mary, a manuscript found in 1896, which describes a unique spiritual vision. In this text, Mary is presented as someone who understands hidden teachings and is capable of guiding other disciples. Unlike the submissive and silent figure from the canonical Gospels, Mary emerges here as a true leader, an intermediary between the divine and the disciples. She is a voice of wisdom and vision, conveying revelations that only she seems to understand. This raises a profound question. Why would Jesus have shared these secrets with her? What kind of unique spiritual connection could they have had? The Gospel of Mary depicts an episode where Mary recounts a vision received directly from Jesus. In this vision, she describes a spiritual path that appears to be complex and mystical, involving stages of soul elevation. Some scholars interpret this as evidence that Mary Magdalene received Gnostic teachings, a form of deep and esoteric spirituality. The description of these teachings suggests that Jesus might have entrusted Mary with knowledge not shared with everyone. But why Mary Magdalene among so many followers? Apparently, she had a spiritual affinity with Jesus that transcends the literal understanding of the other disciples. Another apocryphal text, the Gospel of Thomas, mentions Mary in an equally intriguing way. Although the Gospel of Thomas is not exclusively focused on her, it provides a glimpse into early Christianity where men and women were treated as equals in the pursuit of truth. In one passage, Peter questions Mary's presence among the disciples, to which Jesus responds in a way that seems to reaffirm her position. This suggests that even among the earliest followers of Jesus, there was resistance to the presence and influence of a woman like Mary. But Jesus clearly defended her, perhaps aware of the depth of her spiritual understanding. A fascinating point in the Gnostic texts is the intellectual and spiritual relationship between Mary and Peter. In several passages, Peter appears questioning or even challenging Mary, suggesting a tension between them. This conflict symbolizes a deep division in early Christianity. On one side, a more institutional and hierarchical view, and on the other, a personal and intuitive spirituality. Mary represents this latter view, a connection with the divine that does not depend on rules or dogmas, but rather on a direct and mystical understanding. Her spiritual leadership, then, seems to threaten those who sought a more organized and rigid power. The Gospel of Philip also offers an illuminating perspective. In this text, Mary Magdalene is described as Jesus' companion. The word companion has sparked controversy, especially as some interpret it as wife or intimate partner. However, other scholars understand companion to refer to a deep spiritual relationship, without necessarily implying a romantic bond. Either way, the Gospel of Philip emphasizes that Mary had an understanding of the divine mysteries, and this closeness caused discomfort among the other disciples. This unique bond reinforces the idea that Mary was more than a follower. She was a figure who mirrored the very essence of Jesus' teachings. These apocryphal Gospels present us with a surprising view of Mary Magdalene as an enlightened person, a disciple who understood the spiritual aspect of Jesus' message. While many disciples seemed focused on the words and actions, Mary was able to grasp the hidden meaning, the inner truth that Jesus conveyed. This intuitive wisdom put her in a role almost on par with the Master. The very fact that she reports visions and spiritual experiences suggests that Jesus saw her as someone capable of understanding and sharing profound truths. One of the most striking moments in the Gospel of Mary occurs when, after Jesus' departure, the disciples are disoriented. It is Mary who calms them, who tries to guide them on the new spiritual journey that unfolds. She reminds them of Jesus' teachings, encouraging them to press on even in the physical absence of the Master. This reveals a spiritual leadership that is rarely mentioned in the canonical texts. Mary Magdalene was not just a listener, she was a teacher, a mentor who understood Jesus' mission in all its complexity. This role as a guide among the disciples reinforces the possibility that she had a special understanding that the others were still seeking. The figure of Mary in these Gnostic texts is a direct challenge to the traditional interpretations that the Church has developed over the centuries. The apocryphal writings suggest that, in early Christianity, women could hold positions of leadership and spiritual authority. Mary Magdalene, as one of the closest disciples, embodies this equality and wisdom. Perhaps it was precisely this egalitarian view that led these texts to be rejected by the official Church, which desired to establish a hierarchical structure where spiritual power was centralized in male figures. With the emergence of these Gnostic texts, many scholars began to question the official narrative. If Mary Magdalene was indeed a spiritual leader, why was this view erased or minimized? These writings suggest not just a secondary role, but a guiding role, someone who was on par with Jesus' closest disciples. This image of Mary Magdalene challenges traditionalism, as unlike the institutionalized Church, the early Gnostic Christians seemed to value intuitive knowledge and personal connection with the divine. These alternative Gospels invite us to reflect on the many facets of Mary Magdalene. Could it be that, instead of a redeemed sinner, she was a spiritual teacher, a representative of the wisdom that Jesus shared? This portrayal leads us to envision an early Christianity where esoteric knowledge and inner search were as important as outward practices. Perhaps Mary Magdalene's message is a reminder that true spiritual understanding is not found solely in scriptures, but in the heart itself, in the direct connection with the divine. This challenging and mystical vision of Mary Magdalene, as a bearer of hidden teachings, invites us all to reconsider the importance of inner wisdom. Through these texts, she emerges as a symbol of spiritual strength and independence, someone who managed to maintain her truth despite cultural impositions and limitations that sought to silence her. In the end, what these apocryphal Gospels offer us is an invitation to question established narratives and open ourselves to a broader and deeper understanding of Mary Magdalene's role. In the Gnostic texts, Mary Magdalene reveals herself as a figure rich in wisdom and spiritual intuition, a person who accesses truths beyond common understanding. In these writings, we find Mary as a guardian of secret teachings, something that profoundly distinguishes her from the other disciples. The idea that Jesus would have shared with her mystical revelations and hidden knowledge sparks a new interpretation about the essence of his teachings. This role as a carrier of hidden wisdom not only challenges conventional views, but also inspires us to reflect on the hidden layers of spirituality she represents. The Gnostic teachings were, in essence, focused on inner search, self-knowledge, and direct connection with the divine. In the Gospel of Mary and other similar texts, we see that Mary Magdalene is described as someone capable of understanding these inner truths. This knowledge was seen as something that transcended rituals and doctrines, focusing on a personal spiritual experience. Turning to these texts, it is evident that Mary Magdalene symbolizes this search for the divine within us. She is not satisfied with superficial answers. Her journey is a quest for deeper wisdom. A fascinating aspect of the Gnostic texts is how Mary stands out as a figure of spiritual courage. In various passages, she demonstrates unwavering conviction, even when confronted by disciples who question her authority and understanding. In times of doubt and despair, it is Mary who brings a vision that soothes and guides the other disciples. This role of spiritual leadership is not accidental, but rather an essential part of her identity in the Gnostic texts. This suggests that, for Jesus, Mary possessed an insight and inner strength that made her a true spiritual leader. In Gnostic teachings, spiritual knowledge is not something acquired externally, but a truth to be awakened internally. Mary Magdalene seems to have deeply understood this, as her visions and teachings are described as experiences of inner enlightenment. In the Gospel of Mary, for example, she describes an ascent of the soul through different spiritual spheres, a journey that represents inner growth and overcoming earthly limitations. This symbolism suggests that, for Mary, the spiritual path was an inner transformation, a death and rebirth that occurred within the soul itself. This profound understanding is what sets Mary Magdalene apart from the other disciples in the Gnostic texts. She possesses an intuitive wisdom that is not confined to literal knowledge, but seeks a direct connection with the divine. This pursuit for an inner knowledge is one of the foundations of Gnosticism, where access to divine truth occurs through personal experience and not through intermediaries. Mary represents this individual journey of self-knowledge and spiritual awakening. For the Gnostics, she symbolizes the search for Sophia, the divine wisdom that resides in each of us. The image of Mary as the bearer of this hidden knowledge raises an intriguing question. Could she then be the true initiate among the disciples? In the Gnostic texts, we see that Mary was able to interpret complex teachings and communicate truths that the other disciples did not fully understand. This role as interpreter of divine wisdom suggests that Jesus chose her in some way to be the guardian of a deeper dimension of his teachings. It's possible that, rather than just being a disciple, Mary was a co-creator of this spiritual message, conveying an aspect of the path that was veiled to the others. However, this unique position of Mary as a knower of spiritual secrets also brought challenges. In various accounts, other disciples, especially Peter, expressed skepticism and even distrust towards Mary's authority. This tension reflects a fundamental division between those who saw spiritual knowledge as something accessible to all and those who believed in a rigid hierarchy. Mary's leadership represented a threat to this structure, as it did not depend on positions or titles, but on wisdom acquired through her direct relationship with the divine. This dispute leads us to a reflection on the true meaning of spiritual authority. In the Gnostic texts, we find Mary Magdalene as the messenger of an alternative spiritual path, one that valued equality, inner search, and direct experience. This path was different from the institutionalized model that the Church would come to adopt, which likely explains why these texts were rejected and marginalized. The figure of Mary Magdalene thus becomes a symbol of resistance and spiritual autonomy. Her journey is a reminder that true divine knowledge is not something imposed from outside, but a discovery that each one makes in their own heart. Maria's teachings on the soul's ascension and the inner path reflect a wisdom that is universal and timeless. Many who study these apocryphal texts see in Mary a representative of Sophia, or divine wisdom, a personification of the sacred knowledge that lies within us all. For the Gnostics, this Sophia is not just an abstract idea, but a living reality, a force that guides the soul on its journey back to the divine. Mary Magdalene, with her spiritual depth, is seen as someone who embodies this Sophia, symbolizing the ability of all of us to access inner truth. In the end, Maria's legacy in the Gnostic texts invites us to explore the power of hidden knowledge and spiritual wisdom that resides within each person. Unlike the dogmas and structures that often limit understanding, Maria's path is a journey of self-knowledge and personal enlightenment. She reminds us that true spiritual knowledge does not depend on power positions, but on the courage to seek the truth within oneself. Her image as a bearer of secret knowledge still resonates today, inspiring those who are dedicated to a sincere and authentic spiritual quest. This inner wisdom that Maria represents is an invitation for all of us to go beyond words, beyond conventions, and discover a direct connection with the divine. The Gnostic texts show us a Mary Magdalene who found this truth within herself and encourages us to do the same. For those who see in Maria a spiritual teacher, she symbolizes the strength and intuition we need to follow our own path of discovery and spiritual awakening. Her message is a reminder that, regardless of the limitations that the world imposes on us, true wisdom is eternal and is always within reach of our own heart. The tension between Mary Magdalene and Peter, which appears in various Gnostic texts, represents much more than a personal disagreement. It symbolizes a conflict of ideas and visions about the role of spiritual leadership and how Jesus' message should be interpreted and propagated. This rivalry, often silent in the canonical Gospels, becomes clearly outlined in the apocryphal Gospels. In each confrontation between Mary and Peter, the future of the Christian movement and how Jesus' teaching would be understood seems to be at stake. Would it be the institutional and hierarchical vision personified by Peter, or the path of experience and inner wisdom represented by Mary Magdalene? The Gospel of Mary is one of the texts that explicitly portrays this tension. In it, we see Peter questioning Mary's authority to convey a spiritual vision she allegedly received from Jesus. He expresses doubts about why Jesus would entrust such profound teachings to a woman, reflecting a common prejudice at the time against female leadership. Peter's reaction seems to be motivated not only by doubt, but also by unease with the fact that Mary had a unique and personal connection with Jesus. This clash between the two highlights a fundamental division in the understanding of spirituality. While Peter seeks external authority, Mary represents spiritual autonomy, a search from within to outward. In the Gospel of Thomas, there is another interesting passage where Peter again expresses discomfort with the presence of Mary Magdalene among the disciples. He suggests that she should distance herself, questioning the legitimacy of a woman participating in the intimate circle of teachings. Jesus' response, according to the text, is a direct defense of Mary, stating that she is worthy of being among them, and even more, that the Spirit does not distinguish gender. This response subverts the cultural norms of the time and reaffirms Mary's spiritual value. What Jesus seems to communicate is that the connection with the divine goes beyond human and social limitations, advocating a vision of spiritual equality. This conflict between Peter and Mary Magdalene, far from being a mere matter of personalities, reflects a dilemma that early Christianity faced. How should the new religion be structured? Peter's vision, advocating for a hierarchical and visible order, would eventually become the basis for the institutionalized church. On the other hand, Mary represents a personal and intuitive spirituality, in which each individual is capable of accessing divine truth without intermediaries. This path, symbolized by Mary, was more akin to an internal quest than a fixed dogma. And for some, this was the essence of Jesus' message, a spiritual freedom that did not require external approval. The Gospel of Philip delves further into this duality, suggesting that Mary Magdalene was not only a follower, but a spiritual companion of Jesus. This closeness between them was viewed with suspicion by some disciples, especially Peter. The term companion has been interpreted in various ways over the centuries, but in the Gnostic context, it could indicate an equal-to-equal relationship, a partnership in which Mary was not just a disciple, but someone who shared Jesus' knowledge in a direct and profound way. The relationship of trust between Jesus and Mary perhaps represented a threat to the order that Peter wished to establish. This tension was not limited to gender issues, but extended to the very understanding of spiritual authority. Peter symbolized a model where leadership was exercised through hierarchies and structures, while Mary represented direct access to the sacred, a vision where wisdom was a personal and unique experience. For the Gnostics, this difference was essential. They saw in each individual's inner experience the true key to spiritual knowledge. Mary Magdalene, with her intuition and personal connection to the divine, was the archetype of this esoteric view, challenging any external structure that tried to impose limits on the understanding of Jesus. As time went on, Pedro's vision prevailed and became the foundation for the institutionalized church. This choice shaped the way Jesus' message would be understood and conveyed throughout the centuries. However, the legacy of Mary Magdalene remained as an alternative voice, reminding us of a spirituality that is personal and independent. She symbolizes a faith that does not require mediators, but manifests itself in each person's own experience. The Gnostic texts that preserved this view show us that, even at the origin of Christianity, there was a desire for spiritual autonomy that was suppressed but never completely extinguished. It's important to note that this tension between Maria and Pedro continues to hold relevance today. The struggle between an external spiritual authority and an internal connection with the divine is an issue that many spiritual traditions still grapple with. For some, Mary Magdalene represents an alternative path, a Christianity where the divine is accessed through self-knowledge and individual experience. In a world where many people are seeking a more personal and less institutionalized spirituality, the figure of Mary Magdalene becomes a powerful symbol of freedom and authenticity. The conflict between Maria and Pedro also reminds us of the transformative potential of feminine spirituality. In many traditions, the feminine aspect of the divine is associated with intuition, wisdom, and compassion. The figure of Mary Magdalene as a spiritual teacher revives these values and shows us that the pursuit of the divine does not have to be limited to traditional norms. She is a reminder that spiritual knowledge can come from within, and that each person, regardless of their gender, can access this truth. Thus, Mary Magdalene represents a transformative force, someone who challenges norms and expands the understanding of the sacred. This rivalry between Maria and Pedro, although ancient, raises modern questions about power, authority, and authenticity in the spiritual journey. The wisdom of Mary Magdalene, with her focus on self-knowledge and inner experience, is an invitation to rediscover the divine within each one of us. Her story shows us that spirituality doesn't need intermediaries, that each person is capable of finding the way on their own. The tension between these two disciples reveals that true spiritual power is not what is exercised over others, but what manifests in the soul itself, a truth that Mary Magdalene embodies in her essence. The legacy of Mary Magdalene, then, challenges us to reflect on what it means to have an authentic and independent spirituality. Her story is a call for us to free ourselves from external structures and to seek the divine in our own heart. Alongside Peter, Mary becomes a kind of counterpoint, a reminder that the divine is not limited to institutions or hierarchies. Her figure inspires us to question, to seek, and to find our own spiritual truth, a journey of autonomy and discovery that continues to echo through time. When we look back at the early church and its formation, we find hints that the role of Mary Magdalene was more significant than many official records suggest. In the first days following the death and resurrection of Jesus, the Christian movement was still a small and deeply connected community, sustained by a newly formed faith. It is in this context that Mary Magdalene, known as the Apostle of the Apostles by some, possibly assumed a position of spiritual leadership that was gradually lost over time. Could she have been viewed as a spiritual leader among the early Christians, but was silenced as Christianity became institutionalized? Historically, the early church faced a constant tension between preserving the essence of Jesus' teachings and adapting to the values and structures of the Roman Empire. As Christianity expanded, it was inevitable that it would clash with social norms that prioritized a rigid hierarchy and limited women's participation in prominent roles. In this scenario, figures like Mary Magdalene, who could symbolize egalitarian spiritual leadership, began to be relegated to less influential roles. It's possible that, in this process, her presence was softened or reinterpreted to fit what was culturally acceptable. The title of Apostle to the Apostles, though never formally recorded in the canonical Gospels, emerged among certain scholars and theologians as a way to express Mary's unique role in the history of Christianity. This title indicates that she was the first messenger of the resurrection, the one whom Jesus chose to share the news of his return to life. If we consider the importance of this event for the foundation of Christianity, we can understand the impact that Mary Magdalene had by being the first to witness and proclaim the resurrection. However, her image was overshadowed over the centuries, transforming from a potential leader into a figure associated more with personal redemption than with leadership. In the early years of Christianity, communities gathered around figures who had a direct link with Jesus, and Mary Magdalene was among the key ones. References to her in the apocryphal and Gnostic texts, where she holds a prominent place, suggest that for many Christians, Mary held a leadership role. She was someone who understood and conveyed Jesus' teachings in a profound and perhaps more intuitive way, approaching a true, wise woman. However, as Christianity organized itself, the importance of a prominent female figure did not fit well with the emerging patriarchal structures. With the Council of Nicaea and other decisions of the Church in the early centuries, there was a clear choice to centralize authority in male figures. Spiritual leadership came to be exercised by bishops and priests, with women relegated to supportive roles. In this context, the role of Mary Magdalene as a possible spiritual leader was minimized. She was reclassified from an important disciple and spiritual leader to a redeemed sinner, a figure that exemplified divine mercy, but did not threaten the hierarchical structure that the Church wished to establish. This process of disempowerment of Mary Magdalene reflects how Christianity moved away from its initial diversity. However, on the fringes of official Christianity, Mary Magdalene remained as a symbol of wisdom and spiritual quest. If we look at Gnostic traditions and other early Christian sects, we find Mary not as a sinner, but as a spiritual guide, a personified Sophia, someone who could connect Jesus' followers with divine wisdom. This role transcends the limited view that the official Church propagated, showing that for many, Mary Magdalene was a source of inspiration and a model of leadership. Her figure endured, inspiring generations to seek a Christianity centered on wisdom and self-knowledge. It's interesting to note that, in certain currents of early Christianity, Gnostic texts were maintained as alternative sources of knowledge, and in these texts, Mary Magdalene was seen as a master, or initiate. Her understanding of Jesus' teachings was deep and intuitive, and she was recognized by those who viewed spirituality as something personal and mystical. But this interpretation was soon marginalized, and female figures symbolizing self-knowledge and inner search like Mary Magdalene were removed from the main narratives, as the Church moved towards a more rigid and organized structure. Throughout history, there have also been attempts to redefine Mary Magdalene as an inspiring figure, but not as a leader. This redefinition, which intensified during the Middle Ages, portrayed her as the repentant sinner, an image that strongly contrasts with the strong and wise figure described in the Gnostic Gospels. This transformation perhaps served the purpose of presenting Mary as an example of redemption, but at the same time to limit her role to avoid an image of female leadership. This image persisted for centuries, but never managed to completely erase the memory of Mary as a central disciple and a spiritual teacher. Even with these efforts at redefinition, Mary Magdalene remained alive in popular and spiritual memory. In mystical traditions, she continued to be seen as a guide for those seeking a direct connection with the divine. Her figure became a symbol of a less rigid early Christianity, where knowledge and spiritual experience were valued. For many contemporary spiritual traditions, Mary represents the search for an inner truth, a faith that does not depend on institutions, but on a direct and personal experience. She is a reminder that spiritual wisdom cannot be restricted by cultural norms. This spiritual legacy of Mary Magdalene, as a guide to self-knowledge and inner wisdom, inspires us to rethink religious structures. She represents the possibility of a faith that values intuition and personal experience. Instead of a hierarchy, we find in her a reminder that everyone has access to spiritual truth, regardless of gender or position. Her story challenges us to question the limitations imposed by institutions and to consider a more inclusive path of spirituality, where divine truth is accessible to all. Today, many spiritual traditions seek to rediscover Mary Magdalene as a figure of leadership and wisdom. For these currents, she is more than a historical figure. She is an archetype of those who seek inner truth and represents the feminine aspect of the divine. Her image as a spiritual guide leads us to reflect on what Christianity could have been if it had embraced a more egalitarian vision from the start. She reminds us that true spiritual knowledge transcends all barriers, being a call to freedom and profound wisdom. Ultimately, the interpretation of Mary Magdalene's role in the early church makes us rethink not only her figure, but also Christianity as a whole. As the apostle of the apostles, or as a spiritual teacher, she symbolizes an aspect of Jesus' teaching that values love, self-knowledge, and the wisdom that resides in everyone. Her story is a lasting inspiration for those seeking true and independent spirituality, an invitation to all to follow their own path towards the divine. Mary Magdalene, over the centuries, has slowly emerged as a key figure in the esoteric tradition and in spiritual practices that seek self-knowledge and inner awakening. Beyond conventional Christian narratives, Mary has been reinterpreted as a true initiate, a spiritual guide whose message transcends the barriers of dogma. In many contemporary spiritual paths, she is viewed not only as a follower of Jesus, but as an expression of the divine feminine, a bridge between the human and the sacred. How did this transformation occur? And why does the figure of Mary Magdalene continue to inspire those who seek a more personal and intuitive spirituality? The esoteric tradition has always valued the hidden and intuitive aspect of knowledge, seeking beyond the formal structures of religions. In this context, Mary Magdalene became a representative of inner wisdom, a figure that symbolizes the pursuit of the hidden truth within each being. She is seen as the personification of Sophia, the feminine principle of divine wisdom, which exists within everyone and guides us towards self-knowledge and union with the divine. This association with Sophia is not just a metaphor, but reflects the view that Mary had a deep and intuitive understanding of Jesus' message, accessing truths that were, in a way, exclusive. In the Western esoteric tradition, such as in Gnosticism and some lines of Christian mysticism, Mary Magdalene is understood as an initiatory figure, someone who underwent a journey of spiritual transformation. She is often compared to other wise and strong female figures who bring balance between the spiritual and material worlds. In some of these traditions, she is seen as the one who carried the secret teachings of Jesus, which could only be understood by those who were also initiated. This concept of initiation reflects the idea that Mary's spiritual wisdom is something that needs to be awakened within each one, something that transcends superficial knowledge. The role of Mary Magdalene in esotericism is not merely symbolic, but practical. In many modern spiritual traditions, she is invoked as a guide for those seeking inner healing, the awakening of intuition, and reconnection with their own divine self. Her life experiences, according to these traditions, represent a process of purification and enlightenment that anyone can undertake. Thus, she is viewed as a teacher who instructs the path of love and compassion, not through dogmas, but through a direct and personal experience. Mary Magdalene embodies the search for truth that resides within each of us, a truth that reveals itself as we delve deeper into ourselves. Some streams of Christian mysticism view Mary Magdalene as a figure that transcends the traditional concept of sin and redemption. Instead of a repentant sinner, she is seen as a wise woman, someone who already understood spiritual laws and divine love fully. This interpretation subverts the traditional role of Mary Magdalene and elevates her to a position of spiritual master, one who knows the secret path of the heart. This image of her has become a model for many who seek a spirituality centered on love and compassion, closer to the principles of Christ and less tied to institutional structures. In the context of esoteric spirituality, Mary Magdalene is also associated with the practice of emotional healing and personal transformation. She represents the journey of the soul that goes through suffering and emerges renewed, symbolizing the power of resilience and forgiveness. Many modern spiritual practices include Mary as a figure of inspiration for healing deep emotional wounds and for accessing unconditional love. She becomes an archetype of healing and transformation, an example of how true spiritual power is one that allows us to accept, forgive, and move forward in our personal journey. Her example is a call for each one to discover their own path of healing. Some traditions even suggest that Mary Magdalene possessed knowledge about advanced spiritual practices, something she would have learned directly from Jesus. This esoteric aspect is popular in spiritual lines that consider Mary as the bearer of secret teachings, transmitted only to those who were prepared to understand the path of the heart. For these spiritual paths, Mary Magdalene represents the sacred union, the perfect balance between the feminine and the masculine, the body and the spirit. This union is seen as a practice of spiritual elevation that leads us to a deeper connection with the divine, a principle that inspires meditation practices and self-knowledge. The figure of Mary Magdalene also resurfaces as a central figure in many circles of feminine spirituality, where she is seen as an example of strength, compassion, and wisdom. She represents the divine feminine aspect, unconditional love, and intuition. Her image is invoked in ceremonies and meditations as a channel to access feminine power, a power that is expansive, welcoming, and healing. For these traditions, Mary Magdalene symbolizes the ancient wisdom of women that has spanned generations, a type of knowledge that is passed from heart to heart, far beyond words. Today, many look to Mary Magdalene as an inspiration to discover their own spiritual truth. In a world where more and more people desire a spirituality free from dogmas, she is a model of independence and spiritual authenticity. Her story is a reminder that true connection with the divine is available to everyone, regardless of gender or status, and that each person is capable of accessing divine wisdom through their own experience. Mary Magdalene, in her essence, teaches us that the spiritual path is unique for each person and that the deepest truth can only be found within ourselves. The impact of Mary Magdalene on esoteric and mystical spirituality is also a claim for a spirituality that honors the feminine aspect of the divine. In a world where the sacred feminine has been suppressed for a long time, the resurrection of Mary Magdalene as a spiritual teacher represents a healing for this imbalance. She brings a message of integration, reminding us that wisdom is not limited to one gender or position, but that we all carry divine potential. In her figure, we find the balance between mind and heart, reason and intuition, a reminder that the sacred knows no boundaries. The esoteric and spiritual tradition sees in Mary Magdalene a symbol of the wisdom that the modern world needs, a wisdom that transcends the limits of logic and communicates directly with the heart. She is a spiritual master who reminds us that truth is something each of us must seek on our own path, a path of self-discovery and transformation. Her presence in contemporary spirituality is a testament that, despite all attempts to silence her, her legacy resurfaces stronger each time, inspiring a new generation to follow the path of love, compassion, and true spiritual freedom. Today, Mary Magdalene stands out as a figure of self-knowledge and wisdom, resonating with those who seek genuine spirituality, connected with the inner essence. In a world where many people are questioning traditional faith structures, her image emerges as a beacon for those who wish to discover the divine within themselves. Mary Magdalene is seen as an example of spiritual courage and authenticity, someone who forged her own path and remained true to her inner truth, even in the face of norms and limitations imposed by her time. She symbolizes spiritual awakening and the freedom to seek answers in one's own heart. For many, Mary Magdalene's journey is a reflection of a quest for meaning amidst adversity. Her story reminds us that the spiritual path is not free from challenges, and that it often requires courage to confront one's own limits. As a figure of self-awareness, Mary Magdalene encourages everyone to explore their own inner mysteries and to discover what it truly means to be in tune with the divine. She is an inspiration to all who view spirituality as a process of inner transformation, where the answers are not imposed, but discovered through a deep connection with oneself. In modern times, the figure of Mary Magdalene transcends the traditional role assigned to her and becomes an archetype of wisdom. She is remembered as a woman who sought beyond conventions and understood teachings that go beyond words, penetrating the essence of what it means to be human and divine at the same time. This deep understanding of her connection with the sacred makes her an example for all who seek a greater meaning in life. Instead of accepting an external and imposed spirituality, Mary Magdalene represents the freedom to live a faith that springs from self-knowledge and self-love. The relevance of Mary Magdalene today also manifests in the feminine spirituality movement, where she is celebrated as a champion of female power and intuition. In a world where knowledge and spirituality have often been dominated by male figures, Mary Magdalene stands out as a reminder that the divine is present in everyone, regardless of gender. She symbolizes the intuitive wisdom and transformative power that exist in every woman. This inspiring role resonates with those seeking a more inclusive and balanced connection with the sacred, one that honors the feminine aspect and embraces the totality of the human experience. Mary Magdalene is also a figure who speaks directly to those seeking emotional healing and personal growth. Her journey is seen as one of healing and transformation, where she not only encounters the divine, but also discovers herself. This story of overcoming is a powerful example of how self-awareness can free us from judgments and stigmas, allowing us to embrace who we truly are. For many, she represents the strength we need to overcome our limitations and move toward a more fulfilling and conscious life. Mary teaches us that the true power lies within us, waiting to be awakened. In esoteric and self-knowledge circles, Mary Magdalene is a model of spiritual independence. She is celebrated as someone who did not wait for others to tell her what to believe, but who directly sought the divine in her personal experience. This example is an invitation for all those who feel limited by external structures, who wish to find a spirituality that makes sense for their lives, and who are willing to seek their own answers. Mary Magdalene teaches us that spirituality is a personal and unique journey, and that true spiritual knowledge is born from a deep and direct relationship with the divine. At the same time, the figure of Mary Magdalene arouses in many the desire to explore the connection between love and spirituality. She represents a form of faith that is lived with an open heart, a spirituality based on unconditional love and acceptance of all aspects of the self. For those who are dedicated to practices of meditation, contemplation, and self-awareness, Mary Magdalene is a guide who inspires to live authentically, where love and compassion are at the center of the spiritual experience. She is an invitation to all of us to accept and love ourselves and others as an integral part of our spiritual journey. The presence of Mary Magdalene in contemporary imagination is a reflection of a collective need to rediscover a spirituality that is true and meaningful. In times of questioning and change, she offers an alternative vision of faith, one that does not demand dogmas or hierarchies, but is grounded in self-knowledge and direct experience. She is a response to the desire of many for a faith that is relevant to their lives, a faith that values inner growth and recognizes the divine in every aspect of existence. For many, Mary Magdalene is a model of freedom and authenticity that transcends all traditions and norms. In the esoteric and spiritual tradition, the image of Mary Magdalene also represents a path of enlightenment and transformation. She symbolizes the journey of the soul, the quest for self-knowledge, and the connection with the divine within. In times of growing interest in independent spiritual practices, such as meditation, mindfulness, and self-awareness, she emerges as an inspiring figure who encourages us to look inward and discover the sacred that dwells within us. Mary Magdalene reminds us that the spiritual path is not something external, but a discovery of our own essence. Beyond religious conventions, Mary Magdalene continues to be a powerful symbol of strength and wisdom, representing a type of spirituality that is deep, inclusive, and personal. She reminds us that everyone has the potential to find the divine within themselves, regardless of their circumstances or the history they carry. Her message resonates with those who seek a greater meaning in life, those who wish to live with purpose and authenticity. Mary Magdalene is an invitation to embrace spirituality as a journey of self-discovery and love, a path where each one is free to find their own truth. Finally, the legacy of Mary Magdalene as a model of self-awareness and wisdom inspires us to live with more presence, love, and compassion. She is a reminder that true spirituality is not something given to us, but something we discover by looking within. Her figure represents the human potential to transcend limitations and to achieve a state of peace and deep connection with the sacred. Today, Mary Magdalene is more than a historical figure. She is a guide for all who seek a life of purpose, authenticity, and unconditional love. Before we go, mind unfettered, we want to hear your voice. Comment below. Do you believe that Mary Magdalene was the closest disciple of Jesus? Or perhaps you see her as a spiritual guide for self-awareness and inner wisdom? Share your thoughts and discoveries about Mary Magdalene. By sharing, we are collectively manifesting the desire for authentic spirituality, free of dogmas, where each one finds their own path. And don't stop here. On the screen, you can click to watch our next video. Awakened Christ Consciousness, the hidden message of Jesus revealed. Let's together unravel the most hidden message of Jesus and explore what it means to awaken the Christ consciousness in each one of us. Until then, mind unfettered, keep expanding your journey and freeing your mind.